now one more quote from my favorite president, President Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
The great communicator, President Reagan, said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free." You are here today to defend not only your rights, but to defend the rights of your children and your children's children. My body, my choice. My kids, my choice. They talked about BR 106 and BR 353. I hope you will contact your members of the Kentucky House and the Kentucky Senate and say, hey, I want this bill passed and I want this thing done the very first week of the legislative session. There's a petition that Take Back Kentucky has on that tent over there to the right, my right, if you'd like to do that. Now, when you go back home, I'm going to need you to, it's easy to stand here and to cheer and to be strong because you're surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of freedom-loving Kentuckians. But you're going to go back home and you're going to need to stand when you are alone in your place of work. You're going to need to stand when you're alone, when you're a kid, if you're a student, and you go back to school. Sometimes you might have to stand alone in your place of work and say, we should stay open and we should be pushing against this. As a Christian, I've read the end of the book. The end of the book tells me at the end times, there's going to be one great one-world government that's going to say, if you don't take a certain little mark upon you or carry a little number around, says that you've got this, that you can't go into any stores and buy anything, that you can't travel anywhere, you can't sell anything. I'm telling you, this is setting the world up for the literal mark of the Antichrist, and every Christian ought to fight against it. United we stand is Kentucky's motto. And the way you do that is you stand one person at a time. And we'll finish with this illustration here today. You know you're at the end when the preacher closes his Bible in the pulpit. It was back during the Revolutionary War. 56 people signed the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th. By December the 4th, half of those men had been killed by the British. General Washington has taken the American army from defeat to defeat to defeat. We haven't won anything. He's got an army full of volunteers. Half the people who said, we'll stand for liberty have been killed. And he knows these men, their shops are not being tended. Their families are not being protected. Their farms, they're laying waste. And if I don't get these guys some kind of a hope, then come the first of the year, they're all going to go back home. And this idea of liberty will be extinguished. I've got to win a victory for liberty. I know what I'll do. The classic military strategy, surprise attack. When is the one day of the year when nobody would expect an attack? Christmas Day. He said, I'm going to attack the British forces on Christmas Day. He sent out word. He said, send the people from the villages and the hamlets. If you love freedom, come to me. And so people started showing up. One of the people who showed up was a man by the name of Thomas Graves. Thomas Graves was a black man. A free black man. Now remember, this is 1776. That was a very rare thing in America at that time. And he goes to General Washington. He says, Mr. Washington, if anybody craves freedom, it is me and my people. And I want to help you on this Christmas Day attack. And I brought my son with me here, Jocko, and we want to help fight for freedom. President Washington, General Washington at the time, looked at Mr. Graves and said, Mr. Graves, I'll be happy to have your help with me on this attack. And then he looked over at his son, Jocko, who's about 11, 12 years old. He says, Jocko, I'm not going to let you come with your father, me, and the other men. You see, this night we're going to do things that an 11-year-old boy should never have to do. We're going to see things that an 11-year-old boy should never have to see. But I've got an important mission for you, Jocko. See, we Americans, we've lost every single fight in this war. And we'll probably lose this one too. And whoever survives the battle, we're going to have to cross back over this river, and we're going to have to find the horses so that the survivors can run and we can fight for liberty on another day. And if we don't know where the horses are at, we're all dead men. Me, your father, and the rest of the survivors. So I've got a mission for you, Jocko. You are a groomsman. A groomsman is someone who holds and takes care of horses. He says, so your job is to hold the reins of these horses and keep these horses here so your father and I and the others can live to fight another day. Now, don't make some big fire, Jocko. The British will see that. The Hessians will see that. You just take this little lamp I'm going to give you. You just hold up this one little lamp. And when I see that one point of light, I will know there is hope, there is life, there is where the cause of liberty can live another day. Can you do that for me, Jocko? He says, yes, sir, Mr. Washington, I can do that. So you probably all know the famous painting, Washington and the soldiers crossing the river on Christmas night. Did you know that 3 men died of hypothermia during the crossing? It's cold up there, up north in winter time, especially on Christmas. 3 men died just crossing the river. Can you imagine what kind of a coat does a little black boy have in 1776? Does this little kid even have any shoes in 1776? Well, as you know, they cross the river and the battle begins. And the muskets start firing and the men start screaming as they're in the battle. And some are screaming for victory, others crying out because they're being murdered. And the smoke from the muskets comes across the river. And on the other side is just Jocko Graves holding those horses and holding up that little lamp. And he's like, was that scream, my father? Was that the scream of the last American dying for freedom? It is so cold over here. I'm so cold. If I could just make a fire, maybe I'd survive this night, but I'm over here, I'm alone. And Mr. Washington said, if I make a fire, the British will see us and all our chances will be lost. So he stood there that night, no fire, all alone, holding that little lamp and holding those horses. Well, if you remember your history, that attack on Christmas Day was the first major victory that Washington and the Americans had over the British and their allied forces. A great victory. They crossed back over the river the next day to collect the horses, and they found that there was one last casualty from the battle the night before. Jocko Graves was dead. He had not been killed by an escaping Hessian soldier or a random musket bullet. Jocko Graves had frozen to death, alone that night on the other side of the river. Now what is amazing is that Jocko had locked his knees. He still had his hand on those horse reins and had propped himself up against that horse and was still holding that little lamp, frozen to death. President Washington said, he says, I want a monument made to Jocko Graves, one of the first heroes in America. I want it set up in my home for everybody to see, to remember, here stands someone alone, but they stood for liberty. You might have seen a replica of this little statue. Nowadays, people think it's a racial slur. They don't even know their own history. It was to honor one of the first heroes of America who stood for liberty. It's always the same. It's of a young little black boy, and he's either holding out a rein for horses or he's holding out a little lamp. He says, I may be alone, I may be afraid, but I will stand for liberty. I need you to stand